Salve discipuli, this is Ars Amatoria, Book 3, Liber 3, 329 to 348 on the education of women. So in many ways, Ovid, like Virgil, like Horace, and especially like Euripides, the ancient Greek playwright, they like to talk about women, but in a very positive way. Now you might say, well, Ovid doesn't really talk about them in a positive way. No, but just the very fact, for instance, that he wrote a book called Heroides, which is giving a voice to women. And here, now you may say, well, this is kind of, the book of love. He sees women as objects, and no one can deny that. However, just the fact that he assumes that women read and are educated and sophisticated, these things come out pretty strongly in Ovid's poetry. When we get to the Metamorphoses, too, we're going to have a number of instances of strong women. And so in that way, he's kind of progressive and open-minded. Okay? Now, we turn our attention to the text here, Ars Amatoria, and I'd just like to walk you through a few things as a pre-reading. Okay, now there are a lot of names and allusions in this section. All right, but as far as structure goes and grammar, well, it's not all that shocking what he does. We have the same technique, don't we, of adjectives and nouns being separated. Usually the adjective in the first part of the verse, not exclusively, and the second part is the noun. But we have this leapfrogging technique. Now, there also are a number of subjunctive forms in this section. All right? Especially as we see right off the bat, the forms of the verb sum. Okay, and so this is advice he's giving. So he's not giving commands, he's giving suggestions. And for that reason, the subjunctive mood is quite appropriate. Okay, let's take a look at it. All right, so here, Callimachus and Koi and Poetai, that all goes together. Those are all genitives. A lot of times you use this as an adjective to describe the place where he's from. The same thing that we have here in this next line, we have the tie-in muse. Okay? And that's a reference to, your book talks about who that's a reference to, Anacreon. That's it, a Greek poet. Okay? So, let it be nota, known by you. What should be known by you? Nota, as your notes point out, goes with musa, the noted muse. So that one is a little bit off. But let it be of Callimachus, of Kos, the island of Kos. I know you'll have fun with that. The island of Kos, of a poet, of the island of Kos, whose name is Callimachus. May it be for you of Callimachus. So we have to supply some words like, we can't forget what we're talking about here on the education of women. So this is a suggested reading list, okay? And known may it be. Okay, may it be a known thing. Okay, also, why isn't my pen working here? Oh, here. May it be a known thing also, Sappho. Okay, and the neuter here, what? Okay, and this has to scan long. Your text notes say this is a comparison idea. And that makes sense because we have a comparative adjective here. Okay? Now, this phrase I thought was especially tough. Uh, the father of whom or for whom or to whom in the dative there. Vafra, sly, subtle, crafty. And so it goes like here, Getai, a generic name, as your book points out, for the idea of a slave. There were a lot of slaves named Geta. And so this is common in Greek poetry where the wily or tricky slave gets the better of the master. We kind of do the same thing in English with the word Karen, right? We say, oh yeah, that, Karen, or she's such a Karen, or some Karen. Okay, that's become popular in our culture, but it's kind of the same thing here when you say Getai. So don't have in mind a particular slave with the name Geta, but there were a lot of slaves in these plays by Menander, who is known as the middle comic, right? And of the Hellenistic period. Yeah, he's a Greek playwright. Okay, so it's something like that. All right, now this kind of ends here, what we have here. You should read Greek literature. Okay, now he's going to go on and say, you should also read Latin literature. And who do we have of the Latins? Propertius, Gallus, Tibullus, Varro, and, well, he makes allusion to Virgil here when he talks about Aeneas, okay? And then finally down here, he says, well, and if you have some time, maybe you should also read some Ovid. And he's acting very modest, but he ends up spilling more ink talking about his own poetry than about the great classics here. So as the poem ends. Okay, so this is just a reading list. Okay, and we often have, of course, the word Carmen, right? We have the word Carmen, which means poem or song. Notice the subjunctive here with posis, all right? Now, tenere may look like a passive infinitive, tenere, and that would actually be the same form, et tenere, but it's going to scan long, so there, properti, all right? And here these genitives, here with tuum you have to understand opus or something, your work, your Carmen would fit there too. Okay, and dicta insignia fulvis willis. We have a double leapfrog technique there. Okay, and here, Valera querenda Germanae tuae, we have a double leapfrog there, or interlacing. Now, velera, we get our word velum from that, which is sheepskin, right? This is an allusion in this section to the golden fleece. And Helena, the sister of Phrixus, as your notes point out, she hopped on the back of this golden fleece and was trying to ride the ram, and she ended up getting thrown and dying in that narrow part of the Black Sea, and hence we got the name Hellespont. Okay, so don't confuse Hela with Thor's sister, right? From, what's that one where they fight against Hela? Can't remember. All right. Yes, Altai Romai, okay, profugum aneum here. I suppose you could take it as a noun, but better as an adjective, the fleeing Aeneas, and read something about the Primordia Altai Romai. Your text makes a note that this is a comparison here, and that makes sense because we have a comparative adjective right here. He really tips his hat to Virgil right here. Okay? It kind of reminds me of Ernest Hemingway, his famous saying about Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. He once said, Hemingway, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in the 1950s, he said, "There's never been anything better written, nor will there ever be written in American English than Huckleberry Finn." And so he compliments, now true, Twain was dead by the 1950s, Virgil and Ovid, but Virgil's dead by this point too. He still tips his hat to Virgil and said, yeah, he's the greatest, or at least that work, the Aeneid, is the greatest. And that's kind of interesting. We get some insight into how well known these works were. Okay? The only one on this list we don't know a whole lot about is Gallus. We do know Varro, but Gallus, his work seems to have been lost. It survives in a few fragments, I believe. But Propertius we have quite a bit of, and Tibullus we have quite a bit of. These also were love poets. Now, Virgil's not a love poet, but the other ones definitely are, and so that's interesting in and of itself. I think what makes this piece fascinating, it's like you can almost see what books are on the bookshelf and what they're reading in ancient Rome. Okay, but now we go on to the third part where Ovid talks about himself. And he modestly starts out with the word perhaps, perhaps, and he says, our name will be mixed in with these, with all these great books, and you might find a couple volumes by Ovid. Okay, and then a really funny side comment, the ones that haven't been thrown in hell, right? I mean, that's the gist of it. The River Leith was one of the rivers of the underworld. All right? Now, Dicet, all right? Dico, dicere, dixi, so we fear a liar. That's not subjunctive. Okay, that's just simple future right there. Now, here we have a quote, an anonymous quote. Someone will say, lege, imperative. Okay? Yeah. So the quote kind of continues for a long time here. Now, the dues partes, your books point out, refers to male and female, or the sexes. That's what we mean by the two parts. So he writes songs, culta carmina. He writes culta carmina for both sexes. Okay, and we know that. All right? And then we go on. Or tener libris titulos. Okay? Tener libris titulos quos signat. Here we have signo, signat, which singles, and here's the name of the book, Of Loves. Okay, here's another imperative. And here, this is kind of I would probably call this a stereotype or a sexist statement, telling the women how to read. How to read. Okay, with docili ore and moliter. Adverb here, just like celeriter, quickly, moliter. That is a third declension adverb ending. All right? Now, just a few lines left. Let's see. There we go. Let's just get this centered a little bit more. Or, okay, epistula. This is, of course, the name of the other book. And what he has in mind are these letters. We read some of them. He's referring to the Heroides here. All right? So he already has, in his mind, an established reputation. These books are, quote, in print, and they're circulating around the upper classes, and the more wealthy citizens probably own copies of them. All right? Books, of course, were very expensive because they had to be copied by hand. Okay? Composita. Yes. These are composita epistula. And this is a means here, woke. Okay? Ignotum opus. And here you can see is finally where the quote ends. Noah here, of course, means something new or strange. And so taken over into the verb form, I suppose you could use invenio, he discovered, but Noah here, noare, to make something new or to create something new, to invent. You can use the word invent here. And then way at the end here, we have a wish. And he talks to the muses, notably Apollo, who has the other Greek nickname Phoebus, I should say. And he talks to the pia numina vatum. Okay? Make sure you get the case correct on vatum. And then he talks about Bacchus. Okay? O Bacchus. And then he mentions the 9 goddesses. And this, of course, is a reference to the muses. There were 9 muses, all right, who were responsible. Most notable among them, Calliope. She was responsible for inspiring songs. We know that ancient Latin and Greek poetry often has an invocation to the muse. What's interesting is that this invocation comes way at the end of this section instead of way up front. All right? So maybe that even tells us a little bit that I'm going to rely on my own talent and skill first, but then way at the end I'll, throw a bone to the gods and goddesses who are responsible for poetry. Okay. Well, I hope that little preview helps, and we will see you tomorrow in class. Wale.